welcome to the Laughing Monkey Music Show. Today by Lou Barlow. How are you?
I'm okay.
Lou is Dinosaur Jr., Sebadoh, Solo, Folk Implosion, and tons of other stuff. I've been a big fan of you for years, and I enjoy your music. I thought we could kind of introduce people that aren't aware of you and people that do like you, kind of talk
Yeah,
about what's going on with you and what they can expect from you and stuff. Okay,
sure. Yeah.
so people that don't know you, you started out well known in Dinosaur Jr.
Yep. In
and
the
then from
1980s, 1985. I mean, before that, I had a hardcore band with J Mascis called Deep Wound, and Jay played drums, and I played guitar. And then in 1985, Jay took over. He started playing guitar and wanted me to play bass, and that's was the beginnings of what became Dinosaur Jr.
Were you playing a lot of different instruments at the time? Because I know you play a few different things now. And you do a lot of your own stuff.
Well, I mean, if you can play a guitar, you can play a bass. That's I'm not so good. I'm not so hot on keyboards. I can't do two-handed keyboards. That would be something, that's something I cannot do, but I can certainly press a button
Hmm.
and I know my way around fretted instruments.
Okay, it's just interesting because people they've learned the path to their songwriting over the years has been different. Some people start off as a drummer, and then and then they go to the guitar. So it's
Yeah.
always an interesting. And if you look back at those musicians, it's like, oh, that makes sense in how you play some of your songs and your chords and the
Yeah.
rhythm.
Yep.
So that's kind of an interesting thing to look at when you like a musician. I listen to all your music, so it's kind of
Right.
a
I'm not a drummer, which is rare among the people that I know. Most people that I know that I've been in bands with are actually they are drummers, are competent, more than competent drummers. I mean, it seems to be rare to find a drummer who does not really play other instruments. But for me, that's been my experience.
Well, and as I learned more, I think growing up generationally, I'm 52, that a lot of things you didn't realize how many people, how many drummers could play multiple instruments. It was like, oh, that's the drummer. That's the guitar guy, that's the rock guy, that's
Yeah,
just the vocalist. And then you start learning, oh, the guitarist and the singer, and oh, wait, the bass player can play guitar. Oh, wait, because back in the day, there's like magazines, and now you're like, wait, now the drummer writes most of the songs for the band. You're like, what's going on here? It wasn't,
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's true.
as time, yeah, that was back in the '80s. You didn't realize how multi-talented artists were at the time to do
Well,
that.
that was the beautiful thing about discovering punk rock to me was that just the anyone can do it
Hmm.
aspect of it, and it also really uh, I guess music to me before I discovered punk rock, it seemed to be very athletic and very particular, and uh, but just discovering this kind of do-it-yourself, homespun music by way of punk rock was a huge revelation for me and really empowered me to just do whatever I wanted, really.
I think that, I mean, the creativity with punk rock also, because you do a lot. The do it yourself thing is very exciting because you create your own artwork. You're your own business person, your own, you know what I mean? It's like a whole bunch of
Yeah,
things you're doing. You're not just doing, I go to the song, I do the gig. It has a lot of
yeah.
different facets, which kind of makes it kind of fun. And it could also be a bummer too, depending on.
Well, I think the people that really succeed, and I would include Jay Mascis, my bandmate, in this, is that from the beginning they understand that they have to get out, they have to tell people, they have to call people.
Mhm.
It's a little bit easier because you didn't have to call, but you do have to call people, and you've got to make your poster for your show. And I mean, I think the people that really do succeed understand that from in a very basic way very early on.
Mhm.
So
And I think it's carried over well. A lot of artists that started out doing that, especially if you look back, a lot of the punk bands that started doing it themselves have
mm,
learned. And as the times change through the rock and grunge, I mean, I like everything, but the point is, like, it changed the commercial viability for types of music. A
mhm.
lot of the punkers and alternative that did that are still around because they've been able to keep it going because it's also a brand and a small business, but a job where you do what you love, don't work a day in your life type of thing. So
Mhm,
it's in their heart, so that they've been able to survive and be very successful to this day. And
mhm.
and and I think the model has shown that a smaller audience, a niche audience, can support you as well as trying to do like buckshot at a barn with like trying to reach out to this huge group of people that don't really care because
Yeah.
they want the single of the week. Whereas if you focus on your fan base,
Yeah.
you get more from it.
Yeah.
And that wasn't always the thought. So, but with you, so you guys, so you left around 88, and then
89, 89 to be
there you go. All right, I wasn't there.
1989. May 1989. I don't know. I
Oh,
forget what it was.
killing me, man. You're
Yeah.
killing me. thereabouts.
Yep, thereabouts.
I didn't get the email from you then. But to that point that you've already been doing Sebadoh, which is a really great band. And what is so your evolution of were you writing songs and put them aside for like this is something I want to do for me, and over the years too, though, this is kind of an open question, like your solo stuff towards
Well,
the implosion, like that kind of stuff. Like, how did you decide how you're doing that?
well, I think from the beginning, I mean, I learned how to play guitar when I was a kid, and so I kind of had I kind of knew my way around a guitar, not real well, but I moved from Michigan to Massachusetts when I was 12, and pretty quickly after moving, I always loved the radio when I was a kid, and being this 12-year-old and kind of being in a new town, new state, new mentality, very different than Michigan. I I started to listen to the radio and I started to search the whole dial. I would do this when I was a kid. I would go the whole
Mhm.
dial of the radio and pinpoint where every station was, and I would put it on a map, AM radio.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and then this kind of carried over to till, in my early teen years because I did that and I started at the far left of the dial and just started to and I heard by chance the Dead Kennedys on WHUS in Storrs, Connecticut, and that was that was the beginning. I just it was like college radio was
It was a
then.
college. I think I used to listen to them too. I would tape it at night because I couldn't hear like a family or whatever. I put blank tapes in, and I'd
Yeah,
hear this. I'm like, who is this? And like for years, I didn't know like who is this group. There it was crazy.
yeah. I was all about I would just wait for they would do the track listing, the playback, and they or the but there's a there's a radio term for it. But when you go back and say what songs
Right.
that had been played, and I would just. But anyway, I think living in Western Massachusetts, uh, it was just the amount of college radio that I was able to get was incredible because I got all the Connecticut stations and all the Massachusetts stations, and of course there's many colleges here, and down in Hartford it was Trinity,
Yep.
uh, UConn, it's in Stores, RTC. I think RTC was Trinity. I can't remember. But anyway, these stations were incredible. I mean, that just totally blew my mind. And there was a one station, the University of Massachusetts station, it's called WMUA, and they had this at midnight on Sundays, they had this kind of freeform radio called Data Vision. And these guys that did the show were very funny. It was kind of Dr. Demento style. And I was obsessed with Dr. Demento too. Then I would stay up late and listen to that. I think it was on WCCC and down in
Yeah, I think you're
Connecticut.
right. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
you're right.
and but just where you'd hear just this oddball music. And
Yeah.
anyway, this was sort of this homespun Dr. Demento, and they had something called the Data Vision Top 10 every week, and it would be mostly record like home recordings that their friends had made or they themselves. I did, and I was obsessed with being on the Data Vision Top 10. And so I was obsessed with tape recorders too. So I was making these very short, very goofy songs. I mean, super goofy, like just with guitars with two or three strings on them, detuned, screaming, and using cassette decks that had, I mean, the portable ones with like
Yeah.
they had really low batteries. If you recorded on it, then it would play back really
How old were
fast.
you at this point? How old were you?
I was 13, 12,
Okay.
13,
Wow.
14. And but I made it my mission to be on the Data Vision Top 10, and I submitted that like a little compilation tape of all of my songs were like 30 seconds or a minute tops. I was because at that point I had heard the Residents, crazy. I'd heard the Residents and Devo and the B-52s and the Flying Lizards and all this because there was an amazing period in the like 1980 where pop radio was just all over the place. It was like
Yeah.
disco, early rap, new wave, hard rock, all at once, and it
It
was
was
just
awesome.
an amazing period. And so anyway, they played my tape on the radio, and that was amazing. And then shortly after that, and actually on that same station, WMUA, J Mascis and this guy Charlie, who was the lead singer of our band that we eventually formed, they had a radio show on Sunday mornings after the polka show where Jay played all of his import hardcore singles. And We, I met one kid in school. I had one friend in school that we ate lunch together, and he loved the Ramones, and we talked about Black Flag and the Ramones, and I was ordering records, and we wanted to be a band, so there was a place called Main Street Records in Northampton, which was
Mhm.
this incredible, little independent record store, and
That's
that
one
sold.
that's down that goes down the stairs, right?
Yeah, it's gone, long gone, but yeah, you're right. It did go downstairs.
Yep.
And it was just this. So that
Been
was
there
the
many
place,
times.
and I put there. Yeah, so you're a veteran, you know. So you were there. You were there. So we put a poster like we want a drummer that plays really fast because I had just discovered Minor Threat, Circle Jerks, the kind of they call it first wave hardcore.
Yep.
And anyway, we met Jay and we sort of cross pollinated. He turned us on to all this amazing English punk rock and hardcore, and he got really into domestic first wave hardcore.
Domestic.
Domestic. I love
Where's
those
what that
functional
term?
terms to hardcore. I love it.
Domestic as opposed to feral.
Domestic hardcore. It's just funny.
I know.
It's funny to think of now. But
Well, and I think back then the great thing is all types of music. If you really look back now, even with punk or anything, there really is a good melody in a lot of the songs. Even like Minor Threat, they're really good songs. Though I mean,
oh yeah, no, it's all about songs. I mean, I
but it wasn't
think.
thought of back then. It was like, oh, punk. You think of you got a pin through your nose or something. Like it was just like it's a garbage can being thrown down the street. But like when you really like got past that, that thought process,
Oh yeah, I
all
mean,
these bands had great melodies.
yeah, I mean, it was pretty out there and scary for the general population because there was a lot of violence that was associated with it. I mean, rightly so. And so when it began to kind of spread, people were really, it's very funny, just like 1981, 82, just local news was all over it.
I
And it
know.
was on Black Flag were on Entertainment Tonight, as like these menaces. I mean, it was very funny. It was like, it was so obvious. The establishment was so freaked out by this idea of kids just going and beating the shit out of each other at the shows. And, um, but of course, that really wasn't the case.
No.
It was a wonderful thing for me as a kid. It was a place that I belonged. It was cool.
Was the scene in? I mean, it sounds like it was a pretty healthy scene for college music. Was it pretty fertile, like with bands playing and being like, liking each other and supporting each other, or was it kind of a competitive scene early on?
Actually, it was really. I mean, early on. I mean, I would say when Dinosaur started playing show. I mean, the hardcore scene was amazing. I mean, it was just. I mean, the town that I live in now, Greenfield. The only time that I ever had been to Greenfield in the past was for these hardcore shows that happened
Mhm.
at a local Grange Hall. And there would be like, I mean, between 6 to 10 bands on the bills. And it would be it would just pull in all of these bands locally. Like the Vatican Commandos played at the Grange, and that's Moby. Moby was in that band. And so a lot of these, and then a lot of Boston bands, but then there would always be these crazy like touring national or international acts. Like there was a band called Crucifix from San Francisco that came through a couple times, and they had the craziest haircuts ever. And there was a band called Raw Power from Italy that came through too. But then like Husker Du, the very first,
Oh
I mean,
wow,
Husker Du really early.
talk
Um,
about trendsetters.
Flipper. I
Yep.
mean, just these
Wow.
wonderful matinee shows at the Grange Hall here in Greenfield. But
It
so that
probably
was.
cost you what, like $3 for
Oh
like see
yeah. Oh
everybody,
no.
like
I mean, it was
ridiculous.
nothing. It was great.
Yeah.
And then it was just yeah, it was just wonderful. And then when Dinosaur Jr. began, I mean, the thing when you're talking about songs, I think there in roughly like 83 and 84, there was this real split within the hardcore scene where a lot of people went. There was this burgeoning, speed metal scene, and people either kind of went that way or like us, we kind of still stuck with the song part of it, because speed metal. I mean, early speed metal is amazing and tons of
Yeah.
amazing songs. Like the first Metallica record, for instance, I mean, it's a real pop classic. I mean, real catchy tunes. I mean, it's like a
Yep.
power pop record.
Once again, you're
But
right. A good song is just poppy. I mean, you
it's
can't
just
escape
poppy.
it.
I mean, it really tells you. I mean, listening to that now, I'm like, wow, what a just a fun poppy record that was, and it really. it really clues you in on what the real appeal of the band was. But that's like speed metal became very extreme as hardcore was very extreme, and a lot of it
Mhm.
wasn't particularly melodic. So I think, but when when we got to be about 18 or so, and we'd done a couple of years being like hardcore kids, it was we just really wanted to stick with we songs or were it, songs and things that were interesting and hard to classify, I
Yeah.
think were really important to us, as opposed to like the metal mentality, which is really like metal. I mean, it's a wonderful scene. I love metalheads so much, and that they really are the coolest crowd of people. But the music is it just went into this incredibly technical and very, that I found it harder to find bands in that realm uh, that made me happy, I guess.
No,
So
it's fair. It's,
I went into so Jay and I went into, the Dinosaur Jr. realm, and Jay wrote all these incredible songs. When he was a freshman at UMass, he just began writing absolutely incredible songs, and that was it. And then
you moved on. So, but at that point though, like, were you guys was how was the songwriting between you guys before as you're establishing as your songwriting skills? Because you're a great songwriter into your
I
own.
was still really early. That was still really early for me, and I was still really writing very elemental, very kind of goofy. I mean, I was really still into this very goofy. Uh, I was not in the same league as Jay when he
Right.
started writing tunes. And and Jay and I, because we didn't have the greatest personal chemistry, and I didn't feel I had a hard time sharing because what I actually had, the ideas that I had were so rudimentary compared to what he was doing, that I felt very self-conscious and kind of crippled to not really, I just didn't feel and he was a very particular person who could say very, very, I mean, I it's hard to admit now, because I mean, but I was like, he hurt my feelings. I mean, it wasn't a
Well,
big,
you
not a
guys were
big
young
thing,
men. No, but you guys were young
not a
men though,
big
and
thing. I mean, looking back on it, it's like, gee, I mean, we didn't get into, I mean, I kind of would have preferred it if we actually were brawling all the time. I mean, like really physically brawling, because it might have, probably would have worked out a little better.
I don't know. I'll be honest with
But
you. I don't
I don't know.
know.
I don't know though. I don't know. But I mean,
Fisticuffs.
I just found he would just say the most withering shit, and that's really, it's really hard to bring songs and things to people who
Yeah.
say stuff like that to you.
No.
It's like
If you're not,
it's
if you can't
hard.
be open, it's very vulnerable to write
Yeah,
a song.
writing a song is very vulnerable. And Jay was a very strong person. Like when we were talking about, I mean, when he started these bands, when we started Deep Wound together, and then Dinosaur, like Jay really put himself out there, made the phone calls. He went to New York all the time. He became friends with Sonic Youth. He really
Yeah.
matriculated
That's an
and
ironic name, too, being called Deep Wound, considering your feelings were hurt.
yeah,
We're gonna name this band after your
that's good.
emotions,
That's a
Lou.
good way to remember the band. That's where I get, yeah. But I mean, Jay was so powerful in the beginning of Dinosaur Jr. And when we were Dinosaur, he was just, I mean, incredibly. It's not a charisma as you would understand it to be, but he
No.
was charismatic in his way, and I was very much, uh, I was like, I was happiest being his foot soldier. It's like, what do you want me to do? I'll
Yep.
do, and I'll do it. And I really locked into it, and really, I loved the music that he was writing so much that it helped me I was able to sort of deal with what made it hard
Mhm.
personally, to just knowing that I was making cool music.
But from the outside, it looks like, though, it looks like it's a good arc. Because I mean, aside from your feelings being hurt or whatever, but it always feels like, because it's got a great story because you guys are back together.
Yeah,
But to the point of, you had a good teacher and a mentor, and but it also kind of pushed you out. If it was the same and kind of nice, you wouldn't have gone out as hard. You wouldn't have pushed yourself as hard,
true. I mean,
and it was a challenge. You know what I'm saying? It kind of may have helped speed you
yeah,
along a little bit,
it
maybe.
did, and especially back then too, because there was so much aggression involved with the music, and there was so much. It was like you didn't like being kind. I mean, there was a lot of vindictive, assholes
Yeah.
who were my favorite musicians back then. And I
If
mean,
you've
I
been a
remember
band, people were well aware of the bands and how it was. If anybody that knows, it was rough. If you
no,
weren't,
it was like I remember we played a show. Dinosaur Jr. played a show with we played a show with White Zombie, early White Zombie, and
which didn't sound like the White Zombie we know. Also,
no,
just
but
whoa,
they were fearsome
oh
nonetheless.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I mean they were a fierce. I mean they were like sludge. They were a sludge
Well,
rock.
that's
I
what I'm
mean,
saying. People
it
are
wasn't
thinking how,
grunge. They took grunge a step
yeah,
more subterranean than that.
different
And
sound.
they were like, and the vibe when they played, and the vibe between the band and the way that
Yeah,
Rob Zombie was like glowering at the drummer, and everyone's frowning, and the show is tense, and Pussy Galore as well, very
wow, what a
super
great
tense.
lineup.
Yeah, but all with like these really strong, like John Spencer, Rob Zombie, very ambitious, creatively ambitious, and then also just like fully ambitious
Yeah,
people, big personalities, but everything, all of the anger was just directed like inward and towards the people that were the closest to it.
probably the band members. The bands were probably fighting just as much before the show.
Oh my God, it was just such a. I mean, Dinosaur were. I mean, as for as bad as it was with us, it rarely spilled out into open hostility.
Right.
And actually, the one time that it did that was like our death knell.
Yeah, really.
It did pretty much one time, and that was it. We in Connecticut. One time, Jay came across the stage and tried to hit me, and that was the beginning of the end.
It must have been weird though, because after you had left, they did have some commercial success,
Oh
and you
yeah,
just, but you also did.
yeah.
What it was with Sebadoh though, with
I
natural
did.
one.
Yeah, I mean, I got. I mean, I guess at first I thought I would never. I remember I had this very vivid memory of being at the Hartford airport
Mhm.
and picking up my sister or something, and I'm like, I'll never be in an airport again. And this was after I got kicked out of Dinosaur Jr. Anyway, I thought everything. I thought it was. I didn't think I'd ever travel again or ever be
Mhm.
in a band again after I was kicked out of Dino. And then, but then I had friends. I had like Eric Gaffney, and we started. He was also another amazing multi instrumentalist, also a very charismatic guy, also ambitious, and I kind of latched to him, and he and I began Sebadoh, and then within a year or two, we were doing pretty well. We were on Sub Pop. We were kind of one of the first non-Seattle area bands signed to Sub Pop, and yeah, we did well. And I was back
Yeah.
traveling around and going to airports again, and it was an unexpected turn. I didn't really know that I would be able to recover.
It's funny as you use Metallica as an example. When they booted out uh, Mustang,
Yeah,
that fueled him on to do Megadeth. There wouldn't have been Megadeth.
right. It's true.
So sometimes if you have a lot of creativity in one band, if early on the nucleus kind of splits, you kind of get a bonus. I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean, Jay's articulated it really well. I think, you know, I would, he's like, we're lucky we weren't like the Ramones,
mhm,
where we didn't stick, where we knew that we had this terrible relationship, but it wasn't sustainable. But had we sustained it the way that, I mean, the Ramones really sustained a very dysfunctional relationship
my God, yeah, so violent,
over a long period of time. And Jay, I mean, he puts it in this very brutal
like
terms, but he's like,
succinct.
at least we aren't dying of cancer in the back of our van, At least we didn't like spend our 20s and 30s in a van dying of cancer. And I'm like,
Yeah,
oh God. I mean, but it's kind of true. It's like
it's healthy though that you guys kind of
it's
did
like
your
it's
thing.
not to hold those things and those kind of grudges, and it would have been bad. I mean, I'm very lucky that they kicked me out.
No, at the time I'm sure it hurt like it felt like the end of the world, but as a grown adult, you can be like, you know what? You have all these creative entities, and you're young, and you're jockeying for this, and you have different personalities and how you handle emotions. It is better that it worked out the way it did, and you can look back, and it allowed you to be. I mean, I can't imagine not writing all the songs you do because you have
Yeah,
your own style. You're so prolific.
yeah. I mean, I'm pretty, yeah.
On a side note, How many songs do you think you have that you had like together that you haven't released that you have done though?
How many
Like,
unreleased songs do I have?
yeah,
Almost, I don't know, not that many. I mean,
really?
yeah, I mean, I did it. I did, well, there's the reason for that is I did something called the Artist Enabler series about 3 years ago through I have the label that I deal with now is called Joyful Noise, and it's kind of a real, um, they just put out the records. It's stuff that I generate myself.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not like I don't get recording budgets or whatever. I just give stuff to them and they release it, which is amazing, which is just purely that's all I need. It's a purely amazing service that they do for me. But we did something called the Artist Enabler series where I released something every month for like a year and a half. So I went into my archives and pulled everything. I just went through and pulled out all the demos, all the unrecorded stuff,
yeah.
and
I've seen a lot of this stuff too, but I just feel like when I see that much stuff, I'm like a guy that writes this much stuff has got to have like the Titanic with the iceberg. I feel like that's huge, but underneath, I feel like it's got to be even bigger. Like you have just like you're just you know what I mean. So to
I
hear
mean,
that is kind of surprising.
no, I mean, I don't. If I finish something, I want people to hear it
All right.
somehow. You know
It's
what
a
I
lot of
mean?
music. I'm not saying you're not getting a lot of music out there. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I mean, well, now I started doing a podcast. My wife and I started doing a podcast, and we do 2 episodes a week, and one of them is called Mini Music Monday. So it's kind of a half
Mhm.
length episode, and it's music based, and
What's it
um,
called? Let's talk about it. Let's promote it so people can check you out here. This
called
is.
Raw Impressions with Lou Barlow and Adele Barlow,
I'll
and
put the link underneath the show too.
yeah, and it's on Spotify and all that stuff. And but I've kind of done it now. But I love it because it's this really instantaneous, almost very
Kind of punk,
immediate. I would
very
say an
punk, right?
immediate way to like communicate to people. And I'm really incorporating music in my four track. I mean, I've written a song. I've started a thing where I'm writing a song every week, and I'm on my fourth song now, where I for the so I'm just generating songs now, but I want them out. You know what I mean? It's like
Mhm.
I want them out. I don't I've always felt that way. And I mean, even when I was a kid, like I wanted to be on that radio show. So and then when I first met Eric, the first thing we did was like put together like a tape with like all of our home recordings on it. Not all of them, but I mean, I don't know. I love the immediate. I just love that immediate
A lot of
communication
artists are
with,
doing that though now. All different types of genres. It's just not the
yeah.
punk ethos is taking over in rock and everything now. It's just a different world.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to, yeah, I got into music because I wanted to make crazy stuff that people I just wanted to make. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
I'm a songwriter. I mean, I definitely that's a big part of what I do, and I take that really seriously. But there's also a side of me that like I just want to do stuff that makes people go like, what the fuck? Like, why did you do that? What is that? Like now with my wife, like with this I don't know how it happened. We had a conversation on the podcast that was involving. Oh, my daughter was really into this baby doll called Baby Alive.
Oh god.
And then I was like, oh man, I remember the early commercials of Baby
Yeah, they
Alive.
still have Baby Alive.
Yeah, it's around. It's still,
Oh,
yeah, she's back, but she doesn't eat the same way. But
she's still alive.
the initial one had like batteries and it chewed. I mean, it was a real creepy 70s toy. But I remember
Yeah.
but then the course of the conversation, I'm like, oh man, I remember that song. I should do that song. So I went and I watched the original commercials because they're all out there on YouTube. It was amazing. So I did like a note for note cover with the voiceovers for the original Baby Alive commercial. And I recorded
Okay.
it on the 4 track and put it on the podcast. And it sounds insane. I mean, I'm like, oh my God, this is
I'll have to
incredible.
go back and hear it. I mean, there's just so much out there. I'll have to go back and check it.
Yeah,
That
there's
sounds
like, so
hilarious.
I did Baby Alive, Rub It Up Dolly,
Oh,
Light Bright. Um,
you have to do a glowworm.
I haven't done Glowworm, but I did do Inchworm. I did Inchworm this week. Inchworm, Digger the Dog. And
Wow.
I found that now I'm doing them. So I go I go to YouTube and then like extract the video from YouTube and then put my version of the theme songs and the voiceovers to the commercial. So it like, you can't, and I'm like,
Tell the difference.
I mean, you can't,
That's pretty
people
awesome
can't tell the
to
difference
mention.
because I did one for Smash Up Derby, which were these things you pulled with
I
it.
oh
You
yeah,
remember that? So I was like, I love Smash Up Derby. So for Christmas, I went back and I watched the Smash Up Derby commercial, learned the song, learned the voiceover, downloaded the original from YouTube and put my version to the old video. And no one knew, I mean, people are like, why is
really.
this? I mean, what's funny about this? It's just the commercial from the 70s. And I'm like, no, it's not. I read I totally redid it.
I'm gonna go back and check these out now. These are awesome. I
I don't
think
know.
I'd love to see you do Busy Town there with Lowly Worm. That would be a good one.
Yeah, I was thinking of yeah, there
There's a ton.
yeah, and I mean I've started doing this as a result of the podcast, but I mean it's like why would but it's still it really satisfies the basic urge, the thing that made me laugh, the thing that
Right.
drew me to music from the beginning, which was like just nonsensical. I mean, like why like what is the point of this? Other because it makes me laugh so hard. Like when I finish one of those commercials and I play it back, I just like I'm in heaven. I'm like I feel like I'm reclaiming these
Your
little
childhood.
dusty corners of my past, and then it just and I use the 4 track, so there's a lot. So you have like a tape pitch, so
Yeah.
you can move the pitch around. I mean, like tape machines are incredible for just. I mean, this is the way they used them in the 60s. They used them as instruments, and
Hmm.
there's so much about digital recording that is really unyielding when it comes to things like that. And um, but yeah, man, a tape machine, a tape machine and a bad idea go a long
Go
way.
for it.
It's just so it's so fun. And I want to do. I think I thought of it today. I wanted to do the Land of the Lost theme. That was because that was a huge Land of the Lost was a huge
Yeah.
musical influence on me because it was mostly banjo and synthesizer. And I'm like, what else? I mean, it's the perfect music, banjo and synthesizer.
Those are two you don't really think about together. That's pretty funny that you
It's
do that. Which goes to what you're known for, and I think it's great. I don't know. I mean, if at one point it feels like a dirty word, they call you the king of lo-fi. I think that term is very, to me, it sounds very endearing. Like I'd wear it like a badge if I was you because it's, you know, it's totally pure. You know what I mean? It's pure songwriting.
yeah. I mean,
I mean, I don't know how you feel like hearing that term, but
well,
because
I
we
mean,
got
for
burned
me,
out in
the
terms.
first thing that leaps into my head when I hear that, where I'm like the king of somewhere, I'm like, as a music enthusiast, the first thing I think of is like, well, Daniel Johnston was like, he was throwing his cassettes out onto the street of Austin, Texas, like I mean, in the 80s, like
Right.
early 80s, really early 80s. I mean, like before me. I mean, I didn't know about him. I was not influenced by him, but I remember when I first heard him when Sonic Youth played it. We did our first tour and Sonic Youth were playing the Hi, How Are You cassette. And I was
Mhm.
like, oh my God. Like, I mean, it was just like, hold, this is a guy who's doing kind of what I'm doing, but the songwriting was
Right.
so incredible, like so incredible. Like just and so that was I was humbled early on. So when people tell me like you're the king, I'm like, no,
Well, I think it's a different thing.
it
I think Deion Johnson is also very different. It's like saying
is
Elvis
different.
is a king of rock and roll, but you're something else. It's not the same. You can't compare those you and
No,
him because you still do it. You do your own type of music, and it's a little bit different. But
yeah,
you've always, by saying that, you've always kept the flag going in all your projects. You weren't just Lou the solo artist because then it would have been a little more comparable. You've kind
yeah,
of always kept that with all of your stuff to this
yeah.
day, and that's what I mean. Is it just follows, as your songs, as an art
Yeah,
form.
I think the thing that I like the most about a tag like that, like King of Lo-Fi or whatever, or being associated with that, is that the people I've met a lot of people, and when they say they're influenced by Sebadoh, it's not because they want to sound like Sebadoh, it's because they want to make their own music.
And that's very inspiring to hear
And
because you don't.
that's something I do really like that because I like that it just really made other people feel like
I can do this.
I wanted that outlet. And I think it's like even if it's like, you know, even if now they have like a big pile of 4 track tapes that nobody ever heard or but at least to know that like the people have they to have that outlet at any point in your life where you're just like where you do go inside and you do try to write songs and you do it's such a it can really it can really kind of save your life, and it can really give you something to do. You
Well, if
know?
you can be inspired, if you can inspire yourself, you don't need anybody for that one moment. So, especially
Yeah,
if you're in a dark
exactly.
spot, it's great. And I think, and you don't need somebody to sound like Sebadoh. You have Sebadoh. You don't need somebody to sound like Freddie Mercury. We already had Freddie Mercury. We
Yeah, yeah,
don't need to have a duplicate. And that was what you talked about early in the 80s when you had a Cyndi Lauper, and then you had the replacements, and then you had like early REM and
yeah,
Prince and all these bands. Nobody sounded exactly the same. They're all different. Whether you like the bands or not,
yeah,
they all sounded different,
yeah,
you know
exactly.
and it was very exciting because you were like, "Who's this band? Who's this band?" You
Yeah,
know, and the Hooters or Mr. and then you listen to Devo or then the Ramones. Like everybody was just so different sounding.
it's true. That's very true. I think
That was inspiring.
yep, I agree.
Well, and the thing is nowadays, and you did not sound like old men to chase kids off our lawn with pitchforks or anything. But what happened is, also with the tape machines, is things changed to a point where it got the timing of music and the original, like when they started getting the point, when you're in a recording studio towards the late 80s, the reel to reel and things are changing down this tape speed. You got to change things and you're splicing things. You're fighting
Yeah,
against the sounds of the tape machine. Then you're making
yep,
things compressed into
yep,
digital and you're taking the high end and the low end off.
yep,
And then you're timing it. And now songs that have to go out on the radio have certain signatures for beats per minute. It doesn't matter how big a star you are or songwriter you are for years. That songwriter has to submit songs now. So I talk to people that are huge songwriters, big, you know what I mean?
mm,
They still have to submit songs in that timing range now, or
yeah,
wouldn't get looked at. And it's only a 30-second sample. So
yeah,
so it's totally changed since the 80s. Like for
yeah.
just
I mean,
hits.
I I don't know why I always want to be. I I always want to say something contradictory whenever I get into this kind of conversation, because I do feel like
Okay, you can do it.
I think that that kind of militant idea of what, pop music has always existed. And there's
Agreed.
always been this really like kind of inflexible standards that are set for every era.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel that way pretty strong about that. And I think the thing about the like pop music now, I mean, it's like I mean, I heard there was that guy from The Darkness has an amazing podcast or something. He
Yeah,
says
he
about
does.
he's like all pop music this today is like, and I'm like, if you really go back and look at each era, it's like,
Hmm.
I mean, like the beginning of rock and roll. I mean, of course, it was like, whoa, there was a period where, rhythm and blues and like black artists were making, but that was destroyed. It was squashed
Right.
through like Elvis Presley was the beginning of this hammer that came down, and just because the powers that be, the money decided that that whatever rock and appeal rock and roll had to be anglicized. It had to be like had to be whitewashed.
Homogenized, right.
It had to be whitewashed. And so if you were, we can look back with these sort of in a Dewey way and go like, oh, and we can now see clearly like, oh, this band did this, and there's all this amazing stuff that happened. I think the same is true now. I think that there's people doing, and even my son listens to this kind of, these strange genres of rap that have really funny names. I don't know. Like when my end of the year Spotify thing came up, it was like, I can't even, I can't remember all of the way that they titled the genres, but a lot of that stuff is the stuff that he plays me
Yep.
is pretty anarchic, I would say. And it does switch a lot between like there's a ton of tempo switching now that happens within even like pop songs, because they finally have figured out how to use time shifting has actually become more of a thing that you can do
Right.
digitally, where it was not. Anyway, I could go on and on about it,
No,
but
no,
anyway,
I agree with you.
I
No,
just
that's a good point. Mine was more of a general, because we're talking about songwriting.
yeah,
Mine's not a definitive, like, because I always think the industry's always been controlled, and it's always good to have something that's the going against the darkness of like, this is what the rules are. If you
yeah,
didn't have the rules in the 80s, you wouldn't, or the 70s, and the record labels and the radio stations dominated what they wanted. It was very crafted. I think what I'm saying, like in the 70s and the 80s, it felt like more people had less rules with instruments and songs, so it allowed a little more of a diverse sound. There are
yeah,
artists now that do it now, but I'm saying it just feels like there's been less and less over time because of what's allowed. But the side note is stuff like this, shows like this, stuff that you do has
yeah,
not stopped it. It's allowed all kinds of versions of music. I'm just talking about like the commercialization of it keeps getting tighter for the radio.
Yeah, I can see that's true, but then that's true. Uh, I don't know. I guess
And I'm not an '80s forever guy either. I'm not that guy who's like just gloms to the '80s. I'm not that guy
I
who's going
love
to
the
swing.
80s.
I love it too, but
I
I'm not
thought
going
I
to.
didn't even understand how much I love the 80s until
I
kind
don't
of
think, but
recently.
that's my point. I'm not going to say that because there's any type of music I'm gonna dog any era.
Well, I mean,
I just
it's
feel
just
looking back, it was an era that had the most diverse
the 80s were
artists.
pretty awesome. I read a really awesome book called Rip It Up and Start Again by Simon Reynolds, and he kind of talks about it's mostly kind of but he talks about how the rise of new wave,
Yep.
and then how new wave turned into new romantic and how new romantic, I mean, how anyway, it's a fascinating book about how, yeah, the 80s really were.
A lot of styles of music came out. I think it was a lot of.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and yeah, it's really when rap really found its voice. It's
Mhm.
when, obviously punk rock. I mean, hardcore totally. I mean, there's so many.
It
I
was
mean, and now,
exciting, but
I mean,
early rap was super exciting. You know what I
oh
mean?
my God, it was so exciting.
I mean, now it's changed a little bit to me because now it's got like it's a lot more commercial and it's
Yeah,
changed.
I
The
don't know.
songs
I mean,
changed. It's got older. So, but to me, earlier on though, I'm like that was so exciting.
oh my
Where
God. Yeah,
it's so
my son's really into rap and kind of going back and realizing that the 90s for me, like for rock music, I'm not a huge fan of the 90s, but my son and
which is funny because Sebadoh really broke in the '90s.
I know exactly. That's what I'm like, that proves how bad it was. Like even I broke through in the 90s. I mean, Jesus,
Nobody was paying attention. I stuck around
I
back
mean,
then.
like how mediocre could it have been? I mean, but anyway, my son and I have been he like I've discovered I didn't really realize all of the amazing shit that like Biggie Smalls did. I don't know. There's just so much amazing rap from the 90s. And I was into rap in the 90s and there was still stuff that I
Yeah,
never crossed my bow and that I'm just amazed by. I just
because I think there was simple things. We didn't have the same over technology of it, just like every other type of genre.
yeah.
You were really relying on creativity. So everybody was just like you're talking about, taking tapes and different strings and two and three strung strings on a guitar for a sound, which is a thing now for a lot of musicians now.
Oh really?
Oh yeah, the singer from the United States, they only uses two or three strings guitars.
Oh, I know. They're incredible. I saw them play. I saw them play this huge festival called Roskilde and I think it's in Denmark. I saw them play to like probably 20,000 people. And yeah, with five strings between the two guys. One
Yeah,
guy had three strings, the other guy had two, and they absolutely destroyed. I've never
yeah,
seen they started off with a cover of Kick Out the Jams by MC5
yep.
and realizing that most of it, I mean 90% of that audience had no idea what that song was. They opened with it and it sounded absolutely incredible and yeah, and I was like, holy shit, they only have like one guy has three
Yeah.
strings and the other guy has two. Pretty sure that's what the setup was, but
I think so. Yeah, because
incredible.
I've talked to
Incredible.
him
I'm
about
like,
that. All the songs are like that. Oh, he writes like that. He writes kids songs too.
yeah, yeah,
We had a lot of talk about poop tuning in a podcast. Kind of a kind of he's a really funny guy. Super laid back. There's really no
yeah.
doesn't take himself too serious, which is really fun. He also has the same do-it-yourself attitude,
Oh
which
no,
is
he's
very exciting. Very exciting guy.
he kind of comes from that scene in Boston that Morphine came from, and Mark
Yeah,
Sand. He played like a two-string bass, I think. His was two-string. So those guys had a really good.
because it kind of it limits you, but it does limit you. You
Yeah,
know.
no, I mean I mean I mostly use my own. The guitar that I use the most is a it has four strings, but it's not. I'll play a baritone ukulele and they'll be like, "Oh, it's a ukulele." And I'm like, "It's not," because I use the two heaviest strings and the two lightest strings off
Mhm.
of a standard guitar string set. And then I have an electric guitar where it is a four string tuning, but it's a 12 string, so I double the two heavy strings
Yeah,
and leave the two thin ones single and write songs in different four string tunings. I mean, it's really
it's
it's where I'm the
changing.
most.
I'm sorry, changing the gauges though. That's what you're doing. It's so much fun to do. To not go
Oh
with a standard pack of them, just like get a bunch of them, and then
yeah.
change the gauges and be like, let's see what happens. It
Oh
can be
God.
really awesome and really
That
awful and awful
That
too.
no, that's actually a good idea. That's just be super random about it. But yeah,
Well, once you do it a few times, you start to get an idea. You're like, oh, this note in this key sounds pretty good. What if I fatten it? Or what if I go really light? What if I go really light? Because you can get a huge sound. You can do like ZZ Top or Van Halen, these huge sounds, and they played or Zappa, they played the lightest strings.
Right. It's so weird, isn't
And you get,
it?
yeah, it is. They get these huge sounds. Or you talk about somebody like I talked to John Parr from who did like St. Louis Fire and all those songs.
Oh
He
yeah.
played super fat stuff, heavy stuff, like, and you wouldn't expect that. So like the rules of what people think you hear and what the string gauges are going to be, or what the sounds, what you're using, are
Yeah.
not really what you think it is. Just like when you're saying, I know this drummer wrote all the songs for the band in the 80s. Like it's what you knew is not what you know. You
Yeah.
know. So
Yeah.
the idea of taking different string gauges and mixing them up and
I-
then figuring out what works for you for a song is
Yeah.
just another way of being like, oh, this is another, two or three strings. You know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
it's awesome. Like I think the fact that someone can take a ukulele or a mandolin, and because it sounds very similar. If one person plays it, it has this one sound, like very, but if somebody knows how to play it,
Mhm.
and it doesn't matter. I hear that song immediately. If I play that same song on a ukulele, it looks like a
Yeah.
man playing a giant tiny ukulele guitar. My kids' ukuleles are behind me. I can't play, but like those are my guitars. So, but to me, I just like I'm like I don't get it. But when the right person plays it, you're like it's
Mhm.
magic.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, it's very exciting.
It is.
But that's the excitement of music. That's why I love it too, and that's why to me as an artist, you're very exciting. You
Oh,
you
thanks.
follow that. Oh, you're welcome. You follow that mantra of just with the song, and it's also surprising your songs aren't actually bigger because knowing how commercial and melody are, you've got a great melody. Your songs have a great song where they can be
I don't
very
know.
very much
Like
radio oriented though. If you really think about it,
that's what I sometimes I wish it was more like in the 60s in the sense that back then it was like if there was a good song, like you would be a band, you could be a totally local band, put out a single
yeah,
that maybe just took off on your local radio station.
yeah.
But if
Yeah,
somebody from out of town heard that thing, they'd be like, they'd immediately give it to somebody else. I mean,
right.
that
Yeah,
was,
you get a radio station that championed you, and even up to the 80s,
yeah.
they that's how the
And
Hooters broke.
you
I
just,
think.
you just, you, the songs that are like, I mean, they're just songs and you don't, I just love how in the 60s it was just how you find you hear like an original, you hear what you think is the original, but then, oh no, it was actually done by this band and, you know,
Right. Or oh no, Brian Wilson wrote it because he wrote all the good songs.
yeah. No, I mean, I would, yeah, I wish people, yeah, I'd love it if people just went through my catalog and said, oh, I'll do that.
Well, that's what I want people to do. I want people to take a minute and be like, it wasn't just oh he's a soul guy or oh he had that song in that band and they did was it the natural one or something. You had that one song is probably your bigger single in the
But yeah,
Implosion band. But to me, that's totally doesn't sound like that's not the sound I think of when I think of you. It almost sounds like a different person.
yeah,
You know,
it is.
it
I mean,
sounds to me
I
like it's like mom and dad. I grew up with mom and dad. Then mom and dad got divorced. Like dad has a new girlfriend. I'm like, who is this person? I don't even know you anymore. All right,
I
it's not
love
that
that.
extreme, but you know what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I
It's not bad sound either. It's just it doesn't sound like your songs.
yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, I want that. I want like I want at some point to just create a body of work that is like so confusing that they
Well, I know,
but
but
like
like
I
there's
just I
so
love
many
the
good.
idea of people I just want I want to I think the most exciting thing for me about music was discovering things. I just love and I want to be I just want to be something that like somebody discovers. I don't know, like maybe every week there's somebody somewhere who starts putting the dots together with me, and they're like, "Oh, oh,
I hope
you
so.
did that? Oh, but I don't, and it just even if it's just for like one person, and I meet these people who then getting the stories. I meet people and talk to them, and when I get the story of how they found my music, it's always kind of different and funny, and
Yeah,
always unexpected, and they're like, and when you really meet people who do really love music, who are not bound by genres and who are
yep.
not bound and who really just find I mean, you just find people that have such incredibly diverse taste and they're totally unpredictable and
Which
I
is more
don't
fun, and
it's so
that's I
much,
think
I love
like
it. I love it. It's like, well, who else do you like other than my music? And they're like, I don't know, Michael Bublé. And I'm like, fantastic.
which is if you looked at like I'm sure when you reach out to you like who you look at some of the guests of my show, I'll have like Jake Shambukuru and I'll have like Arthur Brown. I have all different people because you have to like all different types of music. I think so. It's very exciting to have. I like the songs. I like different types of music. And to me, one of the things, we'll sort of wrap this up, but I want people to check you out because one of the things that's very exciting is that when you have an artist that you love,
Yeah.
and they talk about stuff you do, I always talk about the deep dive, and now it feels like everyone's doing it. We're all talking about it now, but you go back, you see what they liked. And one of the great things you did, you actually turned me on to some music, was
Oh,
you did
cool.
a record thing for like Amoeba or something years ago.
Oh
It's on
yeah.
YouTube, and you
Yeah, yeah.
mentioned a couple bands in there, and really kind of turned me on to them. And I checked them out, and they're on my
Yeah.
playlist. So it's very exciting because it's like, oh, I like his music. What does he like? Let me just write
Yeah.
that down.
I love that too. I
So
love
you
that.
did that to me as a person who
Oh,
listens to a
that's
ton of
cool.
music. You've got more music to listen to now.
That's
So
amazing. I love that.
and that's my goal, like with this show, with like all different things. I want people to check you out because
Oh, nice.
as
Thanks.
you're welcome. You have a lot of different songs, but you have a lot of really just well written, good songs. And I think if you just want to hear the term, oh, it's lo-fi, oh, it's from the '90s, oh, it's from this. If you really strip that all back and no one said what it was from, and they just played it,
Yeah.
like that's just a good song. When was this from? Who's
Yeah.
this? Like if
That's
you
what I want. I want who's this? I
and it's
want
hard to
one of my
do.
songs to play in a supermarket and or at a radio
Well,
record
I think you
store.
could do it. Not all bands could do it. I remember. I want to say this really quickly. It was in the '90s. Remember the band Death Angel? So obviously they're a heavy thrash band, right? You've heard them.
Yep. Yep.
They wanted to change it because they had an album that had some really beautiful acoustic music on it. And it totally
Oh,
didn't sound like that. It was beautiful. So
wow.
they came out with it. It was instead of Death Angel, they called it was like a blank cassette cover. They sent the radio stations because I remember I was working for the label interning,
Wow.
and it said
Wow.
DA Act Three.
Yeah.
So you didn't know the band was, so the voice sounded different as a singing because he had a beautiful voice than a
Wow.
thrash voice, and it was all
Yeah.
like acoustic-y symphony.
Wow.
At first, everyone's like, "Oh, I don't know, it's not fitting the format." And then finally, like, "All right, it's Death Angel," and they're like, "Oh, but this doesn't sound like Death Angel. What are we supposed to do with it?" Like, it was a good try, and maybe ahead
Yeah.
of its time and concept.
Yeah.
But like an artist like you could kind of pull it back. You could be in a chill place to play where it's not like there are no rules.
Mm. Yep.
This is exciting. So what do we got for you? So you have a ton of music out. So if people go on iTunes or Spotify or whatever, you've got solo stuff, you've
Yep.
got the bands you've been in, you've been back with Dinosaur for I would like to say around 2006, 2007, but you'll probably correct me anyhow and say it was May
2005.
May 3rd, 2008 or something. And now
It was the like I think February,
yeah.
no, March, April of 2005, something like that.
Okay. See?
No, I know. I remember. The only reason that I remember is that
Holy Rain Man, that is a good
my
memory.
daughter was born. My first daughter was born that year that we
Okay.
and she's 17. So
Good for you for having a memory, but at the point I can't remember my kids'
I,
names. I get them confused with the dog's name, the cat's name. Hey, you works good. Or I just say, hey, can you do this for me? And kind of looking their way.
wow.
That's
I
just how
really,
it goes as a dad. And a granddad. It
oh my
starts
God.
to go. So like I said to everybody, if it follows the show, all the links are under here on podcast and on YouTube.
Yeah,
Check you out.
check out my. I want people to check out my podcast because it's funny. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll link to the podcast, all your other stuff. Actually, your website too. You have some good stuff on that.
Yeah, I don't really keep up with that.
You haven't been. I was gonna
No,
say you should.
I haven't done that in a
A couple
really long
years.
time.
Been a couple
Like
years since you updated it. But there's
many years.
actually some good stuff to look back if they're not a fan of you to know.
It's
You do
true,
have a lot
actually.
of you do
It's a
have stuff
fun
put together.
website.
It's an archive. That's what you should actually do a little more on it because, or link up some of your videos, some of your fun videos you've been doing.
I lost. I had like a computer set up that where I could easily do like HTML, and then I lost it, and now I have no idea what to do.
Uh,
I'm like, I don't know how to do. I don't know how to get into that gate anymore. It's like a locked garden. It's like with a high gate. And I'm like, well, there
that
it
is
is. I can't
that's
get
like a
in
lot of
there.
that's a lot of artists now. Or they started something and they can't get into it. Everyone's locked
Like,
out
I
of their
don't
own
know
stuff
what do I
now.
do with that. And it's just amazing how the music industry is. They figure out ways to make money.
They do, but and but the problem is like with my show, I don't do it for money. I actually do it just support artists.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not a money making thing. It's all my love of the artist,
Yeah,
and I want
podcasts are all about
no,
the love, man.
no,
You
it
got to
costs you
do it
money.
for the
Well,
love.
some people think they're going to make money from it and become this like career. My show's not named after me because I could care less if people know who I am. What I want people to do is get them watching the show like in the '70s and being like, "Hey, remember that special we saw on TV with Barbara Walters and they're talking about that artist or that actor? Oh yeah, they seem a little bit different than what I thought they were by being stereotypical. It kind of opened my eyes. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
I want that inspiration when people walk away going, "Hey, is that who he is?
Yeah.
He's like me. He's like my neighbor. I'm gonna check out his music. Like that's the experience I want people to walk away with, and that's it. I have no other desire for anything. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep.
Um, but I want to thank you, man, for being on the show.
No
It's been
worries.
fantastic. It's been great. Maybe next time we'll have to look, I'm about to buy a coffee or burrito down in Northampton. Some of those great restaurants or some crazy pizza, 13-layer pizza or something. If this place is still open,
Place is that?
wasn't it like the pizza place down? Got all the specialty pizzas down there in Northampton. What's it called?
That's
I don't
true.
even know the name.
They were early on. What was the name of that place? I know what you're talking about. I can't
It was
remember
right before.
the
I have not been.
name.
I have not been since COVID though, and up before COVID, it was still there.
Go back. It's happening.
So I
Still
will
there.
now. I'm slowly getting out. I'm slowly getting back out in the real world.
Come on, man. Get out.
I know. I will. I will. I want to thank you, man, for being on the show. This has been great.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Cool.